Hi, I'm Mary Kopczynski, the CEO of Regulator. Welcome to this week's Regulatory Roundup. This week, there were 1,662 alerts from 343 unique U.S. regulators, and 351 had to do with coronavirus. The regulator of the week is the SEC, that was on fire with enforcement actions. JPM, Morgan Stanley, and John McAfee of the antivirus software company all got busted for not insignificant amounts. You can hear more during the Fine Tracker segment. The topic of the week is money services businesses. I'm not going to get into all of the background here, but money services businesses have to register with FinCEN and typically 49 of the 50 states if they plan to offer their products nationwide. The Conference of State Bank Supervisors have worked with the Money Transmitter Regulators Association to come up with a centralized exam process for a company to register and get recognition across multiple states. This week, the very first money services business accreditation was given to the Ohio Division of Financial Institutions. On to the good stuff. Cannabis. Colorado's governors granted historic pardons for those who were convicted of possessing 1 ounce or less of marijuana. California's governor signed a number of bills, including marketing rules for cannabis products. For those of you following climate rules, the EPA is having a public meeting of their Environmental Financial Advisory Board to encourage private investment in opportunity zones. Freddie Mac is going to market with another round of sustainability bonds. Ohio, along with other states, are testing wastewater for COVID as a method of detecting the presence of the virus in a given location without having to actually test people. For those of you following crypto, get ready. The SEC fined Salt Blockchain $250,000 for an unregistered ICO. Texas busted a guy in Washington state for using Craigslist to find investors to fund a cryptocurrency trading software company. The CFTC shut down a multi-million Bitcoin fraud for making false representations, and the perpetrator is paying $7 million in restitution to the two customers. The CFTC also filed an action against BitMEX, an unregistered trading platform, for violating multiple CFTC regulations, including failing to implement any sort of anti-money laundering procedures. The platform, which was owned by a complex web of companies, accepted $11 billion in Bitcoin deposits and made more than $1 billion in fees. The SEC charged businessman and computer programmer John McAfee for promoting investments in initial coin offerings to his Twitter followers without disclosing that he was paid to do so. He tried to sound impartial, even though he was paid more than $23 million in digital assets for his promotions. He even lied when investors asked him directly if he was being paid. The California DBO, which is soon to be replaced with the new CFPB of California, issued an opinion about a digital payroll company that didn't go in the company's favor. They had hoped their digital disbursements would qualify them for a payroll processing exemption, but according to the DBO, they were not. Moving on to more generic cyber fintech innovation, a number of states participated in this month being Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So there are various workshops and meetings happening across the country if you're into that sort of thing. Lots going on related to working from home and operating safely. There was also some commentary from FinCEN and Treasury together on ransomware and how it's becoming rampant with the pandemic. In fact, the FBI reported that the number of complaints about cyber attacks had reached 4,000 per day, which is actually a 400% increase compared to before the pandemic. And the international police agency Interpol also reported an alarming rate of cyber attacks globally. But the really big news in cyber is the $39.5 million settlement over the 2014 Anthem data breach, where 78 million Americans had their data stolen. All of the states made the announcements about how much of the money was coming to their constituents. In terms of fintech deals, Ginnie Mae made an announcement that they're entering a 10-year, $140 million cloud services contract with Deloitte, AWS, Bank of New York Mellon, and a set of other software providers that are going to focus on building a more modernized and centrally managed infrastructure. New York State is launching a program for New York State-based small businesses to grow their online presence. This is a first-in-the-nation program with leading global e-commerce enablers, including Shopify, Square, Clearbanc, and Etsy. They're going to provide hands-on assistance, training, and counseling. The Pennsylvania Insurance Department announced 2 insurance coverages have been added. One is wire fraud for certain insurance agents that don't have cybersecurity coverage, and a second has to do with medicinal cannabis cultivation. In other federal news, the OCC is looking for feedback on its guidance regarding Pillar 2 of Basel II. For those of you into capital requirements, now is your opportunity. And for the many of you in my network that are dealing with QFC and contractual stay requirements, the OCC is asking for feedback on their already regular information collection. So if you feel like speaking up, now's the time. Also, the OCC, Fed, and FDIC continued the delay of CECL, the current expected credit loss changes, so accountants can breathe a little easier. Lots still happening with the Community Reinvestment Act, or the CRA. Remember, there's 3 agencies normally involved, but the OCC last June jumped forward with a new version. Well, this week the Fed had some speeches on it that are worthy reads. The OCC issued 3 items that are required to support the implementation of this new CRA rule they issued. And of course, also, the OCC released the evaluations that they performed in September. Also, huge news, the Fed formally approved E-Trade being purchased by Morgan Stanley, as well as a portion of Charles Schwab being bought by TD Bank. For those of you watching SROs, FINRA is proposing amendments to Rule 2165 that has to do with financial exploitation of senior investors. They're proposing to extend the hold period and allow temporary holds to further address suspicious activity. On to our fine tracker this week. JPM was fined a record $920 million from the CFTC and $35 million from the SEC for spoofing and manipulating the U.S. Treasuries market. Spoofing was definitely on CFTC's radar because they also lobbed 4 charges against a Chicago firm for spoofing agricultural and metals future contracts. It also caught a spoofing scheme in the crude oil future market by some folks in Slovakia. Morgan Stanley was fined $5 million for Reg Show violations in its prime brokerage swaps business. Football fans will be happy to know that the SEC stopped a fraud focused on football players who were awarded litigation funds over concussions. The 2 defendants had raised $4 million from about 20 of these investors and, of course, were using the funds for personal stuff. The SEC also caught a guy running a Ponzi scheme targeting cadets in the U.S. Air Force, of course, making false statements and then spending it on gambling and jewelry. And if you want to avoid fines, the OCC released its bank supervision operating plan that the OCC staff members will use to guide their supervisory priorities. So you can read it, not do those things, and then not get fined. For those of you following the LIBOR transition, the DOJ's antitrust division wrote a letter saying that ISDA's standard model documentation for derivatives that contemplates the end of LIBOR is not going to harm competition. That's a hurdle that needed to be overcome for everyone's sanity. Freddie Mac is pricing a deal that has a combination with a 7-year term bond that is still backed by LIBOR, but some floating rate deals that are linked to SOFR. The Farm Credit Administration is meeting tomorrow, and one of the agenda items will be SOFR versus LIBOR, key differences, and resulting challenges for a LIBOR transition. For those of you following social justice issues, the New York pink tax went into effect this week, banning businesses from charging a pink tax, otherwise known as charging different prices for substantially similar consumer goods or services that are marketed to different genders. The governor of California signed a first-in-the-nation law to study and make recommendations on reparations for slavery to the Black community. He also signed 2 bills prohibiting the use of race, ethnicity, and national origin to seek or obtain convictions, impose sentences, and it also reduces discrimination in jury selection. He also signed a bill to prohibit the use of certain police practices. They are going to investigate police shootings of unarmed individuals, as well as reform the juvenile justice system. New Jersey is attempting to pass a Reproductive Freedom Act. In other general state news, the California Department of Insurance again is pushing insurance companies to a place they don't want to be over the California fires. In an effort to assist survivors, California wants insurance companies to give 100% of personal property coverage limits without any detailed inventory as to the losses. It's a repeat of previous requests by the state, but certainly newish given the severity of fires for the past few years, plus the refusal by the state to allow insurers to cancel fire insurance policies. So we will see how this plays out, because it is certainly unprecedented times. New York is requiring fair coverage for mental health and substance abuse. That will go into effect at the end of this year. And in booze news, the U.S. Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau granted establishment of 3 new viticultural areas, which means wine can grow there now. So Virginia, Oregon, and San Luis Obispo on the coast of California. But I have to say, Frank, Paul, I'm never going to be okay with Oregon Pinots. And for those of us who prefer a harder spirit, Alabama is allowing residents of legal drinking age to enter a contest where they will get the right to buy limited releases of highly coveted whiskey brands. I've never been so jealous of constituents of another state. That's it this week for Regulator's US Alerts. Join us every Wednesday morning on LinkedIn, and for the longer version, see us on YouTube.